Our next talk will be on equity by Musa Mhlanga.
Okay, what is equity? I think this was a challenging question for all of us here until I saw this really amazing cartoon, and it basically summarized it very beautifully here. I think we all think of equality and equity as being equivalent, but actually what we're really striving for, I think, in projects like the HCA is equity. We implicitly understand that we don't all start in the same place. Some of us are taller than others, some of us are shorter, some of us can see further, but we'd like to kind of harmonize all our abilities to participate in watching that baseball game. So the HCA, I think, is really anchored on these egalitarian principles, and we would like to consider things like gender and age and all the axes that Shyam described at the end of his talk as things we would like to sample in creating our atlases. And that, for us, I think, is a benefit because it's representative of all of humanity. On another level, we'd like organizationally to be inclusive to the multiple and diverse nations and cultures and ethnic groups that exist on this planet. And that means that we really have to make a concerted effort in our policies to identify and overcome the barriers that would allow us to do that successfully. We also want to be educationally inclusive and touch multiple sectors of human society. And essentially, we can use the HCA almost as a vehicle to educate and really transform at the youngest levels and trainee levels of scientific education our abilities to do this type of sampling. So what are the first goals that the HCA has taken towards equity? I'm here as a kind of one of the co-leaders of the Equity Working Group with Alex Shalik and Partha Mujern. And we lobbied the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to assist us in organizing a meeting in London over the summer. And at that meeting, we invited over 36 people from around the world who we thought were thought leaders on the scientific level and who had really diverse backgrounds in trying to catalyze the development of broad international scientific projects. And we kind of locked them in this room in the Wellcome Trust for 2 days, and we tried to tap their deep knowledge in shaping and articulating the HCA's strategic goals as they would pertain to equity. I think one of the key things we were looking for was develop an initial action plan and try to avoid us being a kind of a talk shop and really give fundamental recommendations that we could bring to the HCA organizational committee. So I'm sorry for the cutoff on this slide, but as I just mentioned to you, we wanted to really make sure that we had actionable outcomes from this meeting. So representation, as I've mentioned, was a very important one, and how we could achieve that across these multiple axes. Participation, which really fosters scientific capabilities in low and middle income countries who tend not to be driven by blue sky research and more by translational research, and how to take projects like the HCA and make them relevant in those situations. And that's really tied to benefiting from data and all the questions around data sharing, data usage, data movement from different areas of the world, like we had earlier with the GDPR discussion. So we really, I think one of the key outcomes here was how the HCA can really ensure this representative sampling. And projects like the one that Shyam just described, I think, are a great example of how this can be done. And it can really empower regional partners to establish their local priorities. And one local priority that Shyam started with was the cholesterol example, which leads to different susceptibility of heart disease. And the information that you could get from projects like the HCA could be highly influential in these different geographic contexts. So this is really important in trying to tie a project like this, which is out of reach financially for many of nations around the world, to actually a key public health benefit. We also wanted to make sure that at the level of the organization, we have representatives with backgrounds in science and law and government and social science. And this is always very difficult because I think myself and I think many people in this room are scientists, and we kind of don't like to be around policymakers or lawyers in these sorts of discussions. And really, global buy-in for success is very hard because these are public funds, and these nations have to prioritize these, their goals in science. And so being able to kind of connect with them and effectively engage with them was something that we, again, thought that would be very important to get guidance from such a group. So we identified these 3 areas. One of them is outreach, workshops, and training. The other is bidirectional travel grants, and also seed projects and pilot projects. And I'm not going to dwell so much on them right now, but I guess the question is, in each of these, we would like to understand how we will define success. As opposed to setting these kind of lofty goals, we also want to understand what our path to reaching them will be. And I think fundamentally, the key, driving force here is empowerment. Equity requires empowerment. It requires the empowerment of people who are normally excluded to be empowered to participate. And we kind of left our meeting in London with this very 3-word sentence, and all the participants scattered around the world. And about 40 days later, we were able to have the very first Human Cell Atlas meeting in South America. And that came directly from our meeting that we had in London. And it was really the first goal that I mentioned to you here, which is the outreach, going and introducing the Human Cell Atlas to people in South America, and specifically to the Brazilian scientific community. And this was driven locally by one of the participants in the London meeting, Lucio Freitas, who organized this amazing program where Alex Shalik, myself, and Jonah Kuhl, who came from the CZI, were able to introduce 2 different Human Cell Atlas projects in single-cell RNA sequencing and in spatial transcriptomics, as well as showing how a major funder is able to support the HCA. So these are the more docile pictures of myself and Jonah and Alex here in Brazil a few weeks ago. And this was held at the University of Sao Paulo, and the rector of the university opened this meeting. And here we have Jonah describing the support of the CZI for the HCA, and it was an absolute blowout in turnout for all these people that they had these overflow rooms where they had live streamed the entire HCA proceeding. So phenomenal success in terms of outreach and interest. And I don't have this slide here, but Jonah had mentioned that not a single application to a single CZI call had ever come from South America. And so now, with the latest call from the CZI, I think he's going to get completely inundated. So we'll see what happens with that. So just to summarize what we did in Brazil, I think we try to introduce their goals from the HCA. We really try to connect what the HCA is doing with the local scientific priorities, and that's really important. Brazil has tremendous disease burden in parasitic diseases that we try to deeply connect to the utility of building atlases around these diseases. We also identified the barriers to entry, which are several, and we assisted them in setting up a working group among scientists from the diverse institutes at the University of Sao Paulo and in the state of Sao Paulo to be able to engage local funders and institutions. As part of that, we also had a really high-level meeting with the largest scientific research foundation in South America, FAPESP, and we got a pledge from their leadership to be able to participate in a specific project that they would help to co-fund in the HCA, which was really amazing. And we really tried to empower the local scientific community to strive for excellence in its engagement with the HCA. And excellence is important, and I underline it because the perception, I think, from many of us here is that people in these low and middle-income countries don't really perform science at the level of excellence, and we really don't want to compromise excellence as we introduce equity into all these parts of the world. And so to kind of reduce our excellence burden, there are things that all of us here can do to help with equity. And the first one, I think, is join a roadshow. Join a roadshow in your part of the world. Go out there and reach out to, I'm saying your part of the world, the parts of, many of you are from Asia or parts of Europe that are probably near other countries where the HCA isn't so well represented. But create a roadshow where you go and you talk about the HCA and penetrate those parts of society where the HCA is completely absent or unknown, scientific society. But the second one, in terms of building excellence, is to create educational content and to participate in training. I think we've got a great deal of expertise in this room in terms of single-cell biology. And in these roadshows, they are the first step we can take in building educational or workshops in teaching people how to make single-cell libraries, develop spatial transcriptomic techniques, use bioinformatic analyses on data, and really try to raise the level of knowledge so that they can participate actively in these programs that we, and large atlas consortium that we have here in the HCA. Provide funding where you can, and this could be by hosting foreign scientists. This could be by being able to send 1 or 2 people from your lab to these different parts of the world. That's something that Alex's lab does, that our lab is doing a lot in South Africa and other parts of Africa, and something I think that many of you here should strive for to do in the broader international community. So we're very open to other ideas and people who are interested in contributing to this effort in one way or another. This sort of summarizes our initial equity meeting. About 45 days later, our first equity roadshow in Sao Paulo. And I think this is a really positive effort that the HCA OC should really look at supporting more of these. And we also lobbied the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to have our first international equity meeting on the heels of the Grand Challenges meeting in Addis, where we will be having a full day dedicated to the HCA. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and thank you for the support of the HCA OC in the Equity Working Group. Thanks.
That was terrific. We have time for a few questions.
So, Musa, that was great. I had a question regarding the structure of collaborations and if maybe we even have the necessary data here amongst us to try to identify whether it's best to be hosting scientists in our own labs, whether it's best to be going to those other institutions, or whether it's necessary to really have that kind of two-way type of communication. Of course, one can think about different ways of defining success, but maybe even amongst us in this room, as we've hosted a lot or traveled a lot to train these scientists, we can begin to understand and actually look at the data to see what's most successful.
Yeah, I think there's some healthy combination of both. One of the things in building local capacity would probably dictate that people from areas where that capacity exists would travel to these other institutes and hold workshops or training groups. And that's important for the following reason, is because Brazil is a great example. They just bought a 10x genomics box. They would love to apply for many of the calls around different CZI calls, different Helmsley calls that are out there, but they don't have pilot data. They don't have experience in doing that locally. And the ability of people from MIT or Harvard or the Broad to be able to travel to those countries and as a collaborative nature and train people in those labs to be able to generate pilot data locally makes their applications way more competitive for these international programs. So you can see, like, in that direction, it can be very useful. Hosting people, obviously, is also a very, very good area to consolidate that sort of expertise.
I just wanted to mention there's also a lot of equity programs and a lot of other, like ISMB or the ASHG. So I'm wondering if we can kind of riff off of with them, partner with them, because they already have a lot of structure in place for bringing, different ethnicities into labs and things like that. So that's just a suggestion. My other thing might be too off topic, but we have a problem with engaging the African American community in Philadelphia with medical research in general. And we've been trying to reach out to some people in some cohorts, possible cohorts for research. And I'm not sure what HCA can do about that or if that's too far afield for us, but there seems to be a lot of suspicions around new technologies and engaging with them. So there's also kind of a human reach out for the community outside of the scientific community that also seems to be lacking. So.
Well, thank you for your suggestion, and yes, I don't really know how to help you with what's happening in Philadelphia.
There's already several networks in disease spaces out who really significantly overlap with the goal of equity and adequate representation and contribution. The Human Heritage and Health, the H3 Africa network is one of those. And we discussed in the kidney working group yesterday that there might be already some natural interactions happening there, particularly with the opportunity to engage scientists who are already active in a network of interactions and trainings. And coming to the questions, how to best do that, I think one aspect is really to talk to your partners and listen to them and find out what in their local environment is the most effective way to participate. And I really am very excited to see that HCA will be represented in Addis Ababa. Really, congratulations to that effort.
Thank you. Just to tell you, yes, we do have H3 Africa participation in the equity working group, as well as the Wellcome, as well as some of the other networks that you've mentioned. We've definitely tried to be very broad in who we've reached out to around the networks you've described.
So following on that, Dilaudum asks on YouTube are there any specific countries the Human Cell Atlas is prioritizing in terms of data collection?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. So Dilaudum from YouTube asks, are there any specific countries the Human Cell Atlas is prioritizing in terms of data collection? Thank you.
I'm not aware of specific countries we're prioritizing besides Europe and the United States, but so outside that, yeah, not really, unfortunately. So,
thank you.
Musa, thanks very much for the overview. These are questions we're all grappling with. Amazing that, so now you're working with a group in Brazil, they've got a 10x genomics machine, and certainly you can see a path to inclusion of such research groups. How do you include people like, say, the people Sarah's working with, who may not necessarily get the equipment, may not actually become single-cell researchers, but you still want to empower them or give them something of value for being a part of this? Like, what would that be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think what Sarah's doing in these parts of Africa is amazing. What I think is that they basically working with local structures that we are trying to nucleate, like we've done in Brazil, would be the most effective way. That would be the way that Sarah could participate with local researchers in building capacity to generate these sorts of data sets locally, in situ. And I guess relevant to the question from YouTube, like kind of prioritize these sorts of unsampled areas of the world.
I think in the interest of time, we'll have to move on. Thank you again.